Welcome Farhan Zaidi, President of Operations for the San Francisco Giants. Thank you for joining us today.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Great to be with everybody. Excited to get to some questions and try to be as helpful as I can to the group.
No, it's not. It's going to be a really casual interview. There's nothing tough. If anything, your loyalties will be tested. That's fine.
Right. I had a feeling that was coming.
Yeah. So, how's Cali weather right now? We're in the East Coast are not doing so well.
Yeah, no, there are times when you're out here and you watch the East Coast weather, and I feel bad for my parents and siblings out there, but I'm also enjoying the sunshine out here, so can't complain.
No, you'll be surprised. A lot of people like the Four Seasons. So,
Right.
so as you know, we're here today to get to know you a little more and talk about your journey on climbing the mountaintop of sports, which is being the president of a sports team. And of course, we'll talk some baseball. So let's start off with your childhood. You were born in Canada to Mr. Sadiq and Mrs. Anjuman Zedi.
Mhm.
You moved to Philippines at the age of 4, and I'm sure you don't remember Canada much, but how was growing up with 4 siblings in Philippines like?
Yeah, no, my older brother was Zishan, 2 years older than me. I think because he's a little older and because he has a much better memory, he has much better memories and greater memories of Canada than I do. But growing up in the Philippines was, a great experience. We had a great international community and particularly Muslim and Shia community that we spent a lot of time with. And it was great to sort of be around other cultures and grow up, in an Asian country that really shared a lot of our own cultural values. So still have a lot of friends from the school I went to that I'm in touch with. A lot of people that came to college in the US and have settled here. So it was a really wonderful experience.
And I know there were some tough times in Philippines too. I read somewhere that there was a short revolt against President Ferdinand Marcos. Did that ever affect you while you were there?
Yeah, yeah. I do have memories of that. And the People Power Revolution and everything that came after. Even though it didn't get too violent in the country, our house was in a gated community, but only a couple of streets over from a main avenue. Where there was some kind of military action. Again, not really intense war type action, but I do remember one night in the middle of the night being awoken by gunfire, that was happening out on that street. And it felt like it was coming from right outside our window. So that was a little terrifying, especially going through that age. And obviously the Philippines, unfortunately, is an area where natural disasters do occur. Was there in 1991, I believe, when Mount Pinatubo erupted. And that was a very difficult event for the country. And myself and my younger brother, Jafar, actually put together a little bit of a charity drive to kind of help people in the country who are struggling after that volcanic eruption. So you're right, but if anybody on this call knows Filipinos, it's a wonderful and very positive group of people, and hopefully that's rubbed off on me a little bit, because I think going through life with a positive attitude really can kind of help you, in your personal life and in your career.
Right. And then from Philippines, when did you move to the U.S.?
I came to the U.S. in 1994 to attend university.
Attend university.
Mhm.
And I've heard that you played baseball yourself, little league and in high school. How was that experience?
Yeah, I did. I that was sort of how I was first introduced to the sport of baseball. A Muslim family friend of ours had their kids enrolled in the Little League in the Philippines, and told my mother about it, probably as a way to get the kids off her hands for a few hours a week, going
Yeah.
to practicing games. And so that was my first introduction to baseball, and I just grew really passionate about it. I loved playing it, loved watching it the few times it was on TV in the Philippines, collecting baseball cards, playing, baseball games on computer. And, the passion just grew from there. Now, once I got to the US where sort of more advanced baseball was played, that was pretty much the end of my playing career. But I enjoyed it while it lasted. And, try not to talk too much about my playing days. That's probably the darker part of my career. But again, it's a great thing about this country that regardless of your background, if there's something you're passionate about, you can get involved and maybe even get greater opportunities.
Right. So can you say you wanted to be a major leaguer all your life, or?
Well, probably, when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. I think, the last time I made an all-star team in baseball when I was like 10 or 11. After that, I was a bench player. So I peaked early. And I think I knew that, my path in sports was not going to be on the playing field.
Okay. So now let's talk about your education. You went to MIT and you got your bachelor's in finance and developmental economics. How was that? Why did you choose to do finance?
Well, I'm guessing you may be surprised that I went to MIT after I had such a hard time getting on this call and getting the phone and Surface set up. I know that may come as a surprise to the organizers, but I really enjoyed my time at MIT. I started thinking I was going to do computer science and electrical engineering, and frankly, when I got into that subject area, there were parts of it I enjoyed. There were parts of it that, to be honest, I struggled with. And I just started taking economics classes as sort of an elective. And, it was just like a sort of a light bulb went off in my head. I was, really, from an intellectual standpoint, captivated by the subject and kind of started thinking about it all the time. And, for those of you in economics or thinking about economics, it's not so much about money or finance. It's really about how to think about problems. And I felt like growing up, that was sort of the way I sort of thought about questions and tested questions. And so it just really resonated with me. And, I wound up, transitioning into economics, focused on development economics and public sector economics. And, I felt fortunate that in school I found a subject that I was so interested in, and I did further studies in economics, and in some parallel universe I might be an economics professor somewhere, because that's how much I enjoyed that field.
Okay, and then you took a little break. You worked for a little while, and then you went on to get your PhD in economics at Berkeley, if I'm
Right.
correct.
Right.
So what made you do that? Why did you want to?
So I worked in management consulting for a couple of years out of college. I worked at the Boston Consulting Group, and to be honest, for those of us, and I think maybe some of the people on this call can relate. There's sort of an acceptable career track, or there's a way that you think you should go after college that gives you the greatest chance of success.
Yeah.
And when I was going through school, and I think it's still true in many ways, it was investment banking or consulting. Those were the paths to try to get to if you weren't going to be a doctor or a lawyer. So I actually lean more towards management consulting because I still had that little thought in my head, maybe I can get involved in sports in some way. And I just thought maybe I'll go work at a management consulting firm, and we'll get on a sports project, and that'll sort of be my inroad. And I did wind up actually doing a small sports project while I was there, but what the bigger kind of break from a sports standpoint is I got connected through my older brother, actually, with somebody who was starting a fantasy sports startup website called Small World, which is no longer around, but in those days was really an up and coming startup company. And I was fortunate, after spending 2 years at BCG, I spent 1 year at this fantasy sports startup. Again, you can tell I was sort of trying to figure out a way to get into sports, and really enjoyed that year. And I had kind of had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to go on and do further studies. So during that year, the company was acquired by a VC firm, and I just kind of had it in my mind that it was time to go back to school. So I got a little bit of that sports itch out of my system, and then, as you said, I wound up enrolling in the PhD economics program at Berkeley.
So was that always your thing? You always wanted to do something in sports, or did you want to do like world relief economics? Like, what was the interest in sports that really made you interested in doing, something in that field?
Yeah, I guess like many of us, it's the type of situation where I just had different interests. When I was sitting in an economics classroom talking about, how to, you know, uh, uh, sort of structure a public health program or something like that. That was really interesting to me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading academic papers about that subject. But at the end of the day, I'd go home and watch a basketball game or a baseball game. I'd be online, searching for different. I was playing fantasy sports. So, that had kind of always been an underlying passion of mine. So, I would say kind of economics and sports were probably the two passions I had going through life. And, economics was always a clear and defined career path that I could have taken. And sports was, more complicated, more difficult without having played. It, at least historically, it's less true now, but it's an industry that was pretty insular. It was hard to break into if you didn't know somebody, if you didn't play. And so I guess in the back of my mind, I always had it like, I'm going to keep trying to figure out a way to get into sports, but I love economics. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And, I guess I have to have some kind of day job while I'm trying to pursue this.
Okay, so that'll be our perfect segue into your career then. So while at Berkeley, apparently you read this book called Moneyball. It's one of my favorite movies.
Right.
And you credit that book to basically being a light bulb. And it just took you off into this, path of baseball. Now, is that true? You read the book Moneyball and you applied at the athletics position?
Yeah, it's funny. A friend of mine who actually now works with me with the Giants, who I'd worked with at the Boston Consulting Group in my first job, kind of told me about this book. He said, "Hey, there's this book, Moneyball. It's about baseball. I know you'd love it. It's sort of about, analytics and how to incorporate it into baseball and the way, people are thinking about the sport now." And I actually really resisted at first. I said, these stats have been around for years and years.
Yeah.
Like even when I was a kid growing up, I was buying, stat books, and now this guy apparently is acting like he invented all this stuff. I don't need to read this. I resisted it for a while. And then when I read it, obviously it's a terrific book. Michael Lewis is an incredible author, and I've actually gotten to know him a little bit through the years because of his relationship with Billy Beane. But the thing that really excited me reading that book was reading about people like Paul DePodesta and David Forst, who worked for the A's, who didn't have the traditional baseball background. They didn't play in the major league. They had better playing careers than I did, that's for sure. But just even reading, the way Billy talked about his staff and the type of people he was looking for, he was just looking for smart, hardworking people who loved the sport, and it didn't matter whether you played or not. So for me, that book, I mean, there's so many themes in that book, but the theme for me was opportunity. It was, hey, if Billy Beane can hire these guys, maybe him or somebody like him would take a chance on me too. Someone like me whose last All-Star game was when he was 10 years old. So that actually, after I read that book, I was in graduate school, but I started kind of looking online and monitoring job postings because that really energized me and said, I shouldn't give up on this. There may be that.
Right. So basically, I guess my question would be then walk us through your journey in baseball. And then, I don't know, from economics to baseball, like why baseball?
Right.
Why not basketball or football? Like, why? Just because it's just the book Moneyball, or is it the amount of stats you get in baseball that really interested you?
I think it was the amount of stats. I mean, I guess I have a little bit of a sort of mathematical mind. So even when I was young, 8, 9, 10 years old, I was buying books about stats in baseball, the baseball encyclopedia, which had the history of stats from 1900, and I would just go through pages and pages of that book. There's a well-known baseball author named Bill James, who's really considered one of the founding fathers of modern day sports analytics, and I would buy his book every year and I would read through it. So I always had it. I think that's part of what drew me to baseball, like you said. Just it was there were so many numbers, and you could get to understand the sport in a completely different way through the numbers. So between just a love of sports and competition, but also a love of math, I think that's what really made baseball stick out to me.
Right. The world is really, surrounded by just math. It's just a number world we live in.
Right.
But so just a segue into a really important question regarding your career. As you know, most of our audience is South Asian Muslims, and with a field predominantly white males, how did you break that mold? And what would you tell our youth who want to do the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, are living in an increasingly progressive society, which is a good thing for all of us. And, the reality is that because of who we are and our backgrounds, there are going to be times where we face discrimination, and maybe don't get the same opportunities as other people. But, as time moves on, and as I think as a country, people get more enlightened and aware and progressive, those people are by far the minority. So I think, for all of us, we can look to the good in people, people that, embrace diversity, who want to hire the best people, regardless of race or religion or gender. And, for me, Billy Beane was one of those people. I, owe my entire baseball career to him, because I don't know that there's another team or general manager in baseball that would have hired me at the time. But I look
Yeah.
around now, and things have progressed to the point where there are many teams that hire people from non-traditional backgrounds. So
Right.
I think for all of us, we should take heart in the fact that there's been a lot of progress. And I started in baseball in 2005. It was only a few years after 9/11, and I can't say there's a single traumatic incident that really stands out to me while I was working
Yeah.
in baseball. I mean, it is a very white sport, and that continues to be a problem for baseball. But there were definitely times when I felt like it was noticed by people that I was a Muslim, that I was a South Asian working in the sport. But again, having a sponsor like Billy just made it so much easier for me. And I think there are more and more of those people in the world who are looking to give anybody who deserves it the opportunity.
Right. And that was my next question. Who do you think is your or was the most influential person in your life and is still a mentor to you?
Yeah. I mean, from a professional standpoint, it would definitely be Billy. And, this may be a, pretty typical and generic answer, but to me, it just goes back to, my parents, who you mentioned at the start, just the work ethic and the values that they have. I could not have gotten where I did, without their example, without
Right.
how hard my father worked, professionally, with everything my mother did for our family. Those themes of kind of hard work, humility, and sacrifice, to me just really stand out. And, those are values that I think many of us in this community have had passed down by our parents. And it's really something that can carry
Absolutely. Mm. Okay, so my next question is a little off track, but it's similar. How big of a role did faith ever play in your life and career, you think?
Did you say faith? Sorry.
Faith, yeah, faith.
Yeah. A big role. And um, I sort of relied a lot on prayer and, the advice of my parents, which I think, that sort of goes together. People that you look to, when you're faced with challenging times. And that's kind of guided big decisions in my life, including the decision to take my first job in baseball with the A's. It's funny. Uh, went to interview for this job. I was, a few months from graduating with my PhD. And, I was over the moon, as you can imagine, when I was
Yeah.
offered the job. But, it was a, and I remember I got off the phone after Billy Bean had offered the job to me. And I said, I didn't even ask him what this job pays. I was and it
Yeah.
didn't pay a lot. I mean, when I started, my salary was $32,000, and
Yeah.
um, I remember being really sort of scared to tell my parents. I'm embarrassed to say it now, but I didn't know what they
Yeah.
think. And you did this consulting job. You're in a PhD program, and you're going to take this job,
Mm.
taking earning $32,000 a year. And I had that fear of telling them and disappointing them, and I was so grateful and happy and actually kind of embarrassed when I told them. and they couldn't have been more excited for me because they knew what passion it was. So I mean, and I think, you know, that comes from faith too. It comes from you know, seeking a direction and kind of living your life with you know, integrity and seeking out opportunities that will be fulfilling for you. So I think you know, even as I've you know, made difficult had faced difficult decisions professionally, you know, moved jobs a couple of times, and you know, there's no doubt I pray before big games too. So that's all a very big part of the experience working in sports. And you know, obviously, I come from a very religious family. I carry those values today, and you know, I think even in a modern society, and even in a sports career, that can really play a big role.
Right. And was there any point in your career where your said job conflicted with your faith? Where did you ever come at a crossroads where like, okay, no, this is wrong, I can't do this because it conflicts with my religion?
Um, you know, I think the big thing for me, this sounds really silly, but um, even you know, celebrations in the clubhouse,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, with all the alcohol being sprayed around when you make the playoffs or advance in rounds, um, and you know, I obviously didn't participate in those, but I remember one year, probably, you know, I think it was maybe the first time with the A's we made the playoffs. So that might have been my second year. The clubhouse manager handed me a bottle of Martinelli's, you know, hey, here, you
Yeah.
know, you should celebrate too. So again, I think that gets back to, you know, people in, you know, that I've worked with, and
Right.
it's probably some of my good fortune, but also, you know, being proud of your heritage and your religion
Yeah,
and wearing it on your sleeve. You know, the more you put it out there, I think the more people respect it. And, you know, and that's fulfilling to you, because none of us should have to not just hide, but even suppress who we are or where we come
exactly.
from. And
Yeah,
again, I think we live in a country now where that's really valued and respected.
absolutely. I agree. Because just a little background, like I used to say, hi, my name is Assad, like for a long time in high school and even in college. But
Right.
somebody like when I started working, people like, how do you really pronounce your name? And I was like, it's Assad. They're like, okay, that's your name. It's not Assad. I was like, wow, that actually, thank you for giving me that feedback. Because like my whole life, you try to fit into this mold almost
Right.
that, you know,
Right.
people make for you. I think that's a
Yeah.
great
And, you
point.
know, I guess we have to, um, you know, check ourselves a little bit if
Yeah.
we're doing that because of our own insecurity or if it's coming
Yeah.
from the outside. So I
Right.
think we all need to make the decision to kind of be who we are and be proud of who we are, because
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
a lot of that comes from us and it's really not coming from external forces.
Right, right, right. It's just our insecurities. You're absolutely right. Okay, so that was all about your career and your early life. Now we can talk some baseball.
All right.
This is probably your bread and butter. We'll start off simple. I think everybody wants to know what your schedule is like day in and day out in off season and in season.
Right.
Like
Well,
what is your 9 to 5 like
yeah, I
work?
mean, you know, on you know, during the season and hopefully, you know, when we're back to playing normal seasons, not like 2020. I couldn't tell you what a typical day in 2020 was like because every day was different with
Yeah,
everything happening.
I agree.
But, you know, I'll go into the office and usually we're there late, you know, after a night game. So, you know, maybe I'm getting into the office at 10 or 11 o'clock, you know, checking in with the staff. We're postmorteming the game from the day before. Uh, you know, a lot of times early in the morning, we have to decide on certain transactions, if we're sending a player down, if you know there's a player on waivers we want to claim. So there's some transactional element that happens early in the day. And for me now, being in a management role, I spend a lot of my time trying to connect with people. So I'll spend a couple hours on the phone, maybe calling, you know, our scouting director or our farm director, people that aren't in the office with us in San Francisco, to try to connect and get up to speed on things. I mean, for any company, and baseball teams work this way, where you're dispersed geographically. I think it's really important to make people feel connected. And so, you know, I try to make sure I spend a good amount of time on that. Um, you know, then I'll have lunch, and after lunch, I'll maybe go down to the clubhouse, meet with the manager, make fun of him for some silly move he made the day. We'll maybe start talking about the lineup for that day. So, there's a right-handed pitcher that we're facing. Maybe we want to play our left-handed guys, talk through the bullpen, who's available, who's down. Are there specific matchups, who do we want facing, Cody Bellinger in a big spot in the 8th or 9th inning. And so, talk a little bit of game strategy. And, then depending on the day, I may go out for batting practice. That's usually a good time to connect with players, and have casual conversations. And, for players, it's important for them to be able to see the management. They don't want to feel like you're just operating behind the curtain. So you want to be accessible. So I try to be out there for that. And then, pretty much 6:37, you've got the game starting. For many years, really until this year, would just work out in the clubhouse in the weight room during the game. And
it's Moneyball.
Yeah, exactly. That's straight from the Billy Green playbook. So that you got to talk about influence. That was a good one. But I've always found that helps kill two birds with one stone, because you got to work out sometime. And I'm telling you, you have so much nervous energy during these games.
Yeah.
Just get on a treadmill and just get it all out of your system. And the one thing I always say is, if I don't work out during the game, I'm just going to eat the whole game. And so I can either, burn 500 calories or I can eat 2,000 calories. So that's kind of why it's actually really important for my health that you keep me away from the food during the games. And the workout room is probably the best way to do that.
Because you probably have the biggest pressure, because you probably put the team together. And if somebody doesn't succeed, it's on you.
Yeah, you know what? It's so interesting. Different people I've worked with have react to games different ways. There are people in my position that I think are very sort of emotional during games, and I try not to be. I kind of try to sort of just be like, I'm an observer, and some of the clubhouse helps. You're kind of just watching the game on TV, and it gives you a good separation. So and I'm really trying to watch the game and get something out of it in terms of what moves might we have to make tomorrow, really evaluating the players on our team. So, you have general managers that are probably screaming during every game. And I would say I'm pretty good at that, but there's probably 2 or 3 times a year where I kind of just lose it and throw a remote or do something like that. But I try to keep that in check. The one thing I'll say is, when you do it very infrequently, it scares the people around you a lot more. So I remember when I worked with Billy, he had a reputation for that. And, by the time I had gotten to the A's, and certainly my later years with the A's, I didn't really see him get upset very often. But when he did, I just wanted to hide under a chair. So, I try to keep the outbursts to a minimum. It doesn't really accomplish anything. And you're not trying to freak out people around you. And then, we'll after the game, I'll kind of shower up and sometimes I'll just head home if there's nothing to talk about. Other times I'll meet with the manager and go through any issues that we'll have to go through going into the next day. So that's a typical day during the season.
All right. So my next question is basically how you got into, well, you answered it before, the number game, but you're one of the waves of GM that really, really blended in old school with new school analytics. And you really not only analytics, you read between the numbers and you see, I don't know, you go with your gut instinct after looking at the numbers. Hey, this player is going to succeed in the league. Right. Now, do you really believe that the new school is better, or is the new school dominating the old school, or is the old school still, there and it's reminiscent of succeeding a good baseball player, basically?
Yeah, I really think you need both. And some of my closest friends in baseball and some of the people that I trust most in our front office are, what we call quote unquote old school scouts who've been around the game a lot and have a lot of experience. And, sometimes I think we distinguish too much between these different schools and the information that people are bringing to the table. There's this great book by behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow that I'd highly recommend to everybody on this call, and I'm sure many people have already read it. And one of the stories he tells really resonated with me because I think it speaks a lot to baseball scouts as well. It talked about firemen and, you know, how they have an uncanny ability to know exactly when a building is going to collapse. So they know exactly when so many times you see, firemen come out of building right before the whole thing, completely collapses. And there've been studies trying to ask firemen, how do you know when that building is going to collapse? And they say it's just gut instinct. And that's not a totally satisfying answer, but as people have studied it more, they've realized they have so much experience and they're getting so many signals that they're processing that it's really a way more informed decision like that. Light intensity, heat intensity, smoke, all these things, they're actually making these calculations in their head without even knowing it.
Unconsciously, yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's the way scouts operate in baseball also. They'll see a player and they'll say, I just think this kid has it. But that's really informed by seeing hundreds and hundreds of players in the past. And, maybe they see a player today and they're like, I think this kid has it. Somewhere in their mind, it's making a connection between that player and like Ken Griffey or Mike Trout or something like that and noticing some similarity. So I try to take that information with the analytics information, but as baseball has become more numbers driven, as any economist knows, like numbers can mislead you as well. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, we shouldn't play this player today because he's hitting 190 on Tuesday nights and we're the Tuesday night game, I say, that doesn't have anything to do with anything. I mean, I know you're trying to be analytical, but what does Tuesday have to do with whether a player's going to get a hit or not? So I think you've got to be really careful, and like everything in life, you got to blend all the information you have to make the best decisions.
Yeah, no, I agree. So how would you pick between, see, you have two players that have very similar numbers. How do you call up one from the farm system and say, oh, okay, we'll give you another opportunity for the other one? Like, how do you pick between two players who have very, very similar numbers?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think the character of the player comes into play. And, it's really interesting. I, and when I say the character of the player, I'm not talking about necessarily somebody who's a good human being. I mean, we all want good human beings, but, kind of just being around baseball, I've noticed, I remember there was a player when I was with the A's that we traded for who, had a great reputation as a person, and deservedly so. He was valedictorian of his high school class. He was a concert pianist, like really talented. And it made you think, hey, this is a player that we want in our organization. Well, a couple of years later, he just quit baseball and said, I'm going back to school. I just have too many other interests, and baseball, isn't really my passion. So we thought we were getting somebody with great character, but they maybe weren't so singularly driven. On the other hand, there are baseball players, that, maybe wouldn't be your best friends off the field, but they're very kind of success driven in their competitive makeup. And, a lot of times that's players who are relentless, who are just, really passionate about baseball and, who have confidence, who think they're major leaguers. When you go from AAA to the major leagues, it's a big jump. And actually, there are many players who are talented enough to make that jump. And sometimes it winds up being the players that really believe that they belong there, versus players that maybe have more insecurities. So I think feeling like if we call this player up, he's going to believe that he belongs in the big leagues versus the guy who maybe isn't as sure. That can be a big tiebreaker in scenarios like that.
Gotcha. Just like a technical question there, because there's a lot of triathletes get drafted right in the first round. What happens to those athletes that choose football or like basketball? Like, do you lose that draft pick?
Yeah, that happened with the A's a couple of years ago with Kyler Murray.
Kyler Murray, yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, so unfortunately they just lost the pick. And it's funny because they drafted him, and at the time he, it was Baker Mayfield that just got drafted, and Kyler Murray was the likely successor to him,
Yeah.
but it was no sure thing that he was going to be the starting quarterback who was going to go to the NFL.
Uh,
And then he went out and was throwing 6 touchdowns every Saturday. And I remember I had some uncomfortable conversations with my friends with the A's, like, "Hey, is this guy going to wind up?" Uh, so, I mean, you give them credit. He's an incredible athlete,
Yeah, he is.
and it just wound up being bad luck. So, in some cases, you get in a scenario where you can compete. Like maybe if Kyler Murray had been a second or third round pick, he would have stuck with baseball. But when a sport takes you first overall in the draft, that's probably the direction.
Yeah, he's not coming. Because I remember, I don't know which team took Russell Wilson too in like the
Mhm.
fifth, sixth round. And
Yeah.
I was like, why are you guys wasting your draft picks on people who are going to go play football? So
Well,
I just don't get the thinking behind it.
what's interesting about Russell Wilson is he wasn't that great of a football prospect at the time, if I recall. And what was interesting is from a baseball standpoint, this is crazy to say, but he wasn't considered a great athlete. When you looked at his running times from home to first,
Yeah.
it's pretty average for a baseball player. Now you watch him running around as like an MVP of the NFL, and you're like, really?
Yeah.
This guy was a good athlete? So people can get it wrong. There's no question about that. But those are fun examples for sure.
Yeah. So you've been with three different organizations now: the Athletics, and I believe LA Dodgers, and now the San Francisco Giants.
Mhm.
And now you've gone from a small market team to a big market team. How is that transition, or what major difference do you see from a small market team to a big market team like the Dodgers and now the San Francisco Giants?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, every stop has been different in some
Yeah.
ways, and I've really enjoyed all three organizations. Been really lucky to wind up with three really great organizations. I mean, with the A's, uh, it was my first job in baseball, so it'll always have a very special place in my heart. And even though it's kind of considered small market, it was sort of all I knew. I mean, it was the one that I
It was
worked.
big market to you.
Yeah. So, and I have to say, maybe some of it comes from my background, which many of us share, the value of the dollar, being smart with
Yeah.
your money. It sort of very much fit, how I think about my own life and my own finances. And so, when I went to LA, that was an adjustment. It was an adjustment, that we've got to go out there in free agency and spend a lot of money, which, by the way, we didn't do a ton of in my time there. Because a lot of money had already been spent before we got.
Yeah, a lot of money.
But,
Yeah.
it's different in big market with the expectations. I mean, my 4 years in LA, it was kind of like, if you don't win the World Series, you're a failure. And so it comes with a different kind of pressure, even if you have success. Now with San Francisco, coming off a period where the organization was really successful,
Yeah.
and now kind of being in a little bit of a rebuild, a little bit of a transition period. It's a different sort of challenge altogether. So again, I'm really lucky that, been with three different teams that not are just different market sizes, but also different parts of, the competitive cycle. And it's just been a lot of fun to experience those different things.
So what I'm trying to get at is there's like two methodologies in MLB. You take a small market team and you bring them to a playoff contender, and you have a big market team that always wants to win. So what I'm trying to say is the small market team are more of a challenge to you to
Yeah.
bring them into a playoff contender, because you have to look at so many details instead of just going out and getting a big player who's already proven themselves.
Yeah, I would say in a lot of ways it's more challenging, but you sort of have more control over how you're going to be
Yeah.
judged, if that makes sense. Because you get to a big market, the Dodgers, the Yankees are the same way.
Yeah.
Nobody cares if you get in the playoffs, right? It's just a
Yeah.
question of whether you win the
Yeah.
World Series or not. And let's face it, you watch the playoffs every year, and the ball bounces one way or another. That's the difference between winning the World Series and not. And yet that's how you're entirely judged. I mean, when I was in LA in 2017, we lost the World Series in Game 7. There were 1,000 different ways we might have been able to win that World Series, and the ball just didn't bounce our way. And we almost got run out of town after that. And then this year they won the World Series, but you go back to even their NLCS series against the Braves, and there were probably 100 different ways they could have lost that
Yeah,
series.
exactly. And they
Got
won.
in. So, and it's great for them that they won, but that's sports for you. I mean, success and acclaim is so fickle. It's the ball
Yeah.
one way or another, and that drives
Yeah, it's a
everything.
very thin line because
Exactly.
as as a as a president of San Francisco, would you have taken out Snell in the I believe it was the sixth inning, and when he was
Yeah, what
dominating?
is really interesting. We had a very similar situation like that in a game this year um, against the Dodgers, a regular season game, but uh, Kevin Gosman was our starting pitcher that game, and he was pitching the game of his life. I mean,
Yeah,
he threw 6 innings. He struck out 9 or 10 guys. He was throwing 98 miles an hour, and we were up 2-0 going to, I think, the seventh inning. And he gave up a hit to the first batter, and we took him out of the game. And then, like, 3 hitters later, we'd lost the lead.
yeah,
So, I remember at the time, I was, I would not have taken Gosman out, and I understand why our manager and a pitching coach took him out. But these decisions are really complicated. And the one thing I've learned in baseball is it's so different watching the game on your TV or
yeah,
being in the stands versus being in the dugout. You're in the dugout, people are yelling at each other. The game is really so much faster.
yeah.
These decisions have to be made, and so much of it is based on the conversations and the planning that you've made beforehand. So my guess is that the Rays had talked about, a pitch count for Snell, roughly how long they wanted him to pitch in that game, and felt good about their relief options. But
I
then again, for us watching the game, you saw how good he was,
yeah,
and you just think, why would you introduce that element of risk? So personally, I mean,
yeah,
it feels like piling on because I think Kevin Cash is a great manager.
yeah.
I wouldn't have taken him out, but I understand it. And again, that's sports, that's baseball.
Yeah, because people were calling for Kevin Cash's head after that game. But I
Right.
read a really interesting article the next day that said the reasoning behind it was, the top of the order was coming up,
Right.
and it was a right-handed batter.
Right.
He would have been rocked basically. in the,
Right.
in
Right.
the, in the,
Right.
but
I
you
mean,
don't
let's face
know.
it.
You
Yeah.
don't know for sure. Like,
I spoke to, I can't remember. I think the score of the game was 1-0 at that point.
yeah,
And
1 or 2-0.
yeah, it was either 1 or 2-0. And I spoke to the Rays GM a few days later, and what I said to him is, the one thing I can tell you for sure is you weren't winning that game 1-0 or 2-0. So there was going to be more scoring, whether it was Blake Snell or somebody else, and so I mean, but that's the passion for us as sports fans is we see a moment and we want to talk about it, we want to debate it. But if you really think about how much more baseball there was in that game, they still could have come back and won it.
Yeah,
But that's comes with the territory as a major league manager. You make a move like that, and a couple guys gets hits, and you're going to get judged for it. So that again, it's part of the beauty of baseball and the beauty of sports.
no, if you're up 1-0 or 2-0, at least the morale of the team is up. Like, hey, you guys are winning.
Right. Right.
As a hitter, I feel like that takes a lot on you. When you go up there and you're up, you're like, okay, I can swing a little more freely than being more conservative.
Right.
And that just changes the whole game. It changes,
Right.
It just turns it upside down. So there's a lot of factors. You know that too.
Right. Right.
That's just me being a fan, just analyzing the game.
No, I think you're right. And I think with that move, a lot of people watching it had this idea of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, just let him keep going. And you know what? If he gives up the runs, everybody can kind of deal with it and understand it because
but just let him do it.
You were riding, yeah. But you bring in somebody else and he gives it up, and it's a lot harder to take.
Yeah, that's understood. Okay, let's move on because I can talk about that all day. So your Giants are a really young team right now. You guys, I don't know if you guys are looking into adding a veteran or not to the bullpen, but you guys finished, since you've taken over in 2019, you finished third in the NL West, behind Arizona and LA, and then you finished third again with a shortened season, obviously, in 2020 in the NL West, behind San Diego and LA. San Diego and LA spent a lot of money building their roster. With San Diego making major leaps, going from last in the division, as you know, to second, and LA coming off just a World Series win. So San Diego did that by signing big players like Machado, spending crazy amount of money
Right.
and really trusting their farm system. Where Fernando Tatis Jr. They traded for him at the age of 17, and he's becoming a superstar now, basically in MLB. So in like the world of like instant gratification nowadays, how do you like make major moves and take your team, to a playoff contender or a World Series contender in 1 to 2 years? Because people don't want to wait 4 or 5 years for a rebuild.
Right, right.
You know,
Well, that's exactly the point. We have so far to go to catch up with the Dodgers and the Yankees of the world that it's just not. It's not a function of just one player, So
yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head. That is the challenge that you're facing when you come into, what really was a rebuilding situation for us here with the Giants.
yeah,
Having a roster that was getting older, that had won World Series in the past, and kind of trying to turn the page, but keep the team competitive and interesting in the present. Personally, this is again, Billy Bean's influence on me. Like, I just don't believe in tanking and putting a bad product out there, and saying, "Hey, we'll get some draft picks and we'll be,"
yeah,
especially in a market like San Francisco. So, our challenge is to bridge the gap and bring in some guys that can make the team interesting. Maybe on short 1 year, 2 year contracts, and if they do great, then there's a chance to extend them all the better. And also give young players an opportunity. A guy like Mike Yastrzemski, who we gave a chance to in 2019, is finished in
yeah,
the top 10 in MVP voting in 2020. And for us to find young players, give them opportunities, and know they'll be with us for 5 or 6 years,
yeah,
that's probably the most important part of our roster building right now. So everybody kind of focuses on the one big free agent, but I can give you so many examples of teams that made a mistake by thinking they were one player away and they really weren't.
right,
Yeah, unfortunately, I hear you on the instant gratification, but that can't be our path right now.
yeah,
We have to continue to do it with depth and multiple signings and giving guys opportunities. But we were, it was a tough end to the season for us. We lost, I think, 4 of our last 5 games, and lost the tiebreaker for the last playoff spot. And had some really tough losses in the last few days. So
yeah.
we were just on the cusp of the playoffs, and we think with a few more moves this offseason, we can at least get into the playoff picture, which would be a lot of fun for us.
Right. So I know you're a big believer in your farm system, and you believe in bringing players in, but you really believe in building your players from the farm system. And is that something that you're looking for the Giants to do, or are you looking to bring players that have been established and are veterans
Right.
in the league?
I think it's got to come from within, and there's a
Yeah.
lot that goes with it. I mean, one of the unfortunate things about this year was there was no minor league baseball, and we had players that we thought could have gotten a lot closer to the big leagues if they'd been playing in the minor leagues this year. So that might push things back a little bit. But, at the end of the day, you look at the Giants when they won the World Series in 10, 12, and 14, it was with homegrown players, Buster
Yeah.
Posey, Van Bumgarner, Crawford, Belt, some of the guys that are still around. And we just don't have that foundation right now. We have a lot of good young players who are maybe a year away. And we just have to keep the seats warm for them, stay competitive, maybe give guys opportunities who will be part of that team with that younger group of players. But that's definitely got to be our approach. And, when you're building an organization like we are right now, it's not just a value in having a young player on your team. It also is great for morale in the entire minor league
Yeah,
system.
absolutely.
They go up and they say, hey, that guy got a chance, coming up through our minor leagues. Maybe that can happen for me too. That morale is really important as well. And it's going to help even more guys help you in the future.
I agree. All right. So we're gonna move on to questions from the audience now. That was my interview for you. I had a bunch of other questions, but we're running out of time, so we have to move a little quickly.
Yeah, no, they were getting tougher, so I'm glad we're changing direction now.
So these are questions from the audience. If they're too tough, you can choose not to answer. But I'm just gonna go from the most popular and just go down from there. Our first question that came in is, what obstacles, if any, do you face being a Muslim in the professional sports industry? And I think you touched on that too during the interview, but if you can just elaborate, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think, it just comes from you know, I think some of these are self-enforced for us. So, when I go to a restaurant, and um, you know, I ask, is there any meat in this dish, or something like that. Um, that can be a little uncomfortable, because then you're
Yeah.
identifying yourself as somebody who is maybe different, or refusing alcohol at a dinner table or something like that. um, but again, I think it just comes from, being able to sort of stand up for who you are, and be proud of it, and not feel like it's something, you have to hide. So, I get asked about, my faith and my background, with all the teams I've been in. People say, oh, you're a Muslim. Do you pray?
Mhm.
Do you fast? All these things. I mean, fasting is a good example. That's probably one of the um, times when it's most apparent to people, your faith.
Yeah.
And, I found it's a great opportunity to educate people on, what it means to be a Muslim. And, again, I think people are always interested to learn about other cultures, but you sort of have to wear it on your sleeve to get those questions
Yeah.
from people.
I
If
agree.
you kind of try to blend in, that conversation is never going to happen. So, I would say the obstacles I've faced, are really internal. They've been when, I feel almost a need to conform, and maybe not be as I hate to say it, but as upfront and proud of my background in faith. But I've learned to do that more. I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the biggest the biggest issue I've ever had was, I became an American citizen a few years ago, but my first 10 years in baseball, I was still a Canadian citizen. And I actually twice had issues where I was refused
Yeah.
re-entry into the US, and actually thought my baseball career might be over. So if we want to talk about, obstacles coming from background, I would say
Yeah.
immigration. Getting through the immigration counter at
Yeah.
airports. That's probably been the biggest one.
Yeah. All right, so that question was from Dr. Azim Hussain. Our second question comes from Samir Kazmi, and it is, what is your take on Rob Manfred and how he handled the Astros and Red Sox cheating and getting away with it?
Right.
Because Cora and Hinch are back in the MLB, and the
Yeah.
players are unpunished. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was, when you're the commissioner, you're faced with a lot of no-win situations, when no matter what you decide, somebody's going to be unhappy. I was on a call with the commissioner and our owners last week, talking about revenue sharing, right, which is a big issue in baseball right now.
Yeah.
And the big market owners don't want to do revenue sharing.
Yeah.
Small market owners all want to do revenue sharing.
Yeah.
And the commissioner is going to make one group or the other very unhappy with it.
Yeah.
So, as far as the cheating scandal goes, and the sign stealing and all that, look, personally, I've seen some of this. I don't know that it has as big of an impact on the game as some people suspect, and there's many examples of that. I mean, one statistic is, the Astros in 2017, the year when most of this happened, they had, as a team, had better statistics on the road than they did at home.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
So then I say, well, if you're doing this elaborate cheating scheme at home, should you be hitting better there? So look, there's no question that the commissioner's ruling was, partly about doing what was right and fair, and partly about getting the sport past the scandal. And you know, people that don't like the Astros and Red Sox, I'm sure would have wanted, greater penalties. But,
Yeah.
I think as a sport, we just had to turn the page.
Okay, so that's enough time for our questions. Now we have a little round called Fire Round. It's just a one-word answer. I'm just gonna, fire off some questions, and you have to answer. You can't either it's yes or no or either or. Okay.
I got you.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. Toronto Blue Jays or San Francisco Giants?
Now, come on, San Francisco Giants.
East
That was
Coast
easy.
versus East Coast versus West Coast.
Ooh, I'm going to say West Coast. I have to say West Coast now.
Your family's on here, so just let me.
I know.
Staying in or going out?
Staying in.
Movie or book?
I wish I could say book, but it's movie for me. It's easier.
Then we have desi food or any other food?
Desi food, no question.
Barry Bonds, Hall of Famer, yes or no?
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble. I'm gonna say yes.
Best MLB player right now?
Mike Trout.
Best MLB player of all time?
Babe Ruth.
What makes a team better, pitcher or hitter?
Pitcher.
Will the Mets win a World Series soon?
I guess it depends what you say by soon, but I'm gonna say yes.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Favorite
My brother who works at Google is going to be really mad at me for that.
Favorite singer?
Oasis, the band Oasis.
Band Oasis. Favorite hobby?
I can't just say sports, huh?
No, you can't. You gotta say it's too vague.
You know, watching TV. I'm a big TV buff, so I'm going to say watching TV.
Okay, so that's my next question. Favorite binging show?
You know, this year it's been, you know, as important as anything. You know, we're going through. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the. Is it the Queen's Bandit? Is that?
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. So that we're watching that right now on Netflix, but I've got a list of 100 shows. I mean, so I could go on that one.
And then the last question: do aliens exist? Yes or no?
Other life forms, I say yes.
And that's all we have for today. So thank you, Farhan, for joining us today.
Okay, great. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Really appreciate that.